alcohol-specific deaths are way higher still than pre-pandemic, and they're not falling anywhere near fast enough. And of course, they exclude, as I've already hinted at, the tens of thousands more deaths where alcohol plays a role. And we need the government to step up. The government's doing some stuff, but it's not where it needs to be. And we need to applaud where they're going, but we need to encourage them to go further and faster. The real problem is rapid delivery. So I think there's a lot of focus on, it's apps and it's about online. And there is some focus on about, it's home drinking. But what's really changed is the rapidity. Rolling forward a few years' time to when we see the alcohol, ONS, alcohol-specific death stats, I wouldn't be surprised if we see an increase for the last 2 years, for 25 and 26, because of this frictionless problem. We know that local authorities have told us that they want to act on rapid deliveries, but they can't do so.
Hello and welcome everyone to one of Alcohol Review's occasional short video interviews. You'll find more on the webpage and the YouTube show notes. Please like and subscribe on there and check the link to see the benefits of the full service. So let's get started. Drinking at home is associated with significantly higher risks than drinking when in hospitality, risks that alcohol delivery apps can potentially increase. So I'm delighted to be joined by Richard Piper, CEO of UK charity Alcohol Change, which is leading a campaign to reduce these risks. And also, while he's here, I wanted to ask him about today's alcohol death statistics and the implications of Alcohol Change's recent study on the potential or otherwise of alcohol-free drinks to reduce alcohol harm for young people. All that said, welcome, Richard.
Hello, good morning.
Firstly, just wanted to get your response to these statistics, which were published just this morning. Just what do you make of them?
Well, I think, the first thing is let's be clear that, every death from alcohol is a preventable tragedy. And I think it's very easy to keep forgetting that. I think one of the privileges of working for Alcohol Change UK is that we have such a strong and direct connection to members of the public. Many of the sort of situations we're talking about here are genuinely heartbreaking and all preventable. And there are real families, and the harm from many of these numbers will be going on for the rest of their lives. So I think it's just really important to get the nature of each of these numbers rather than just go first into the numbers. I mean, obviously it's great that there is a small drop, but I think in a way, there is a risk that lulls us into a sort of false sense of security about alcohol harm. Oh, good, things are falling. The reality is that and this is alcohol-specific deaths only, of course, alcohol-specific deaths are way higher still than pre-pandemic, and they're not falling anywhere near fast enough. And of course, they exclude, as I've already hinted at, the tens of thousands more deaths where alcohol plays a role, alcohol-related deaths. And on top of that, the millions of us whose lives are affected by the wider toll that alcohol has on our health and well-being. So, deaths is a tip of an iceberg, right? Lots and lots of alcohol harm happens. Hangovers, headaches, tiredness, mood, energy, mental well-being, financial challenges, relationships not being where they can be, because millions have those lower level harms. Actually, those lower level harms add up to be really quite significant at a population level. So focusing on deaths is of course super important, but it shouldn't allow it to distract us from all the big scale of alcohol harm. There is more harm affecting more people that aren't just about deaths and that sort of severity. So and of course, finally, I suppose inequalities are writ through this data. We know that men, older generations, those living in deprived communities are still experiencing higher rates of death than women, younger generations, or those in affluent areas. So we need to be, I think, really sharp in staying focused on calling out this is all preventable, and we've got to continue taking action. And we need the government to step up. The government's doing some stuff, but it's not It's not where it needs to be, and we need to applaud where they're going, but we need to encourage them to go further and faster.
Thank you very much for that sort of timely, immediate response. And on to the other topics I mentioned in the intro there. Alcohol Change is leading a campaign on alcohol delivery apps with the hashtag End the Delivery Trap. Could you outline some of the problems you've identified with these apps?
Yeah, I think the first thing to say is the real problem is rapid delivery. So I think there's a lot of focus on, oh, it's apps and it's about online. And there is some focus on about, oh, it's home drinking. But what's really changed is the rapidity. And actually, some people are not ordering through apps. They're ordering through phone calls. They're ordering taxis. And it's the rapidity and the lack of regulation around that rapidity that is the primary root of the problem. I think in some ways, anybody who's been in and around alcohol policy gets the availability point, right? So that the more available something is, alcohol, a substance like alcohol, the more harm that occurs. You only need to be on the sofa on Christmas Day with a box of chocolates right next to you to know that actually moving them away, in fact, please can someone move these away, it is a really common reaction. And we know that it subconscious brain keeps eating the chocolates, even though the conscious brain going, I shouldn't. So we know at a deep human level that availability is a real issue. Rapid delivery is working to create significant additional harm using the data we've got. And we think there's at least two mechanisms going on. First, the impulsivity point. We know a lot of this is exactly the point about subconscious impulsivity. If you've got rapid delivery, it can come within 20 minutes, 30 minutes to your door without you having to leave the house. You've got all pretense, I suppose, of impulse control has disappeared. And secondly, of course, you've got people ordering while intoxicated. That's potentially very severe intoxication. The sort of intoxication that means they couldn't leave the house, or wouldn't be able to physically leave the house, or would be too embarrassed to leave the house, or if they could leave the house and weren't embarrassed, may still not be served if they did manage to get to that corner shop or the local supermarket or indeed the local hostelry. That regulation, the core, if you like, of our centuries-old licensing act about not selling to intoxicated people, for all its weaknesses, for all the sense that definition of intoxication has never been there, there is a core protection there that has been swept away by these apps. We cannot and should not expect delivery drivers to be doing doorstep intoxication checks. We need companies that are making millions out of these to really step up, whether that looks like intoxication checks at the point of ordering, which we've done some initial work on what that can look like, a cap so that you can order one rapid delivery per person per day per app. That would be completely implementable. It doesn't ban these things, but that means that you've got a real limit to the harm. And thirdly, a pause that means that in Australia they've introduced 2-hour pause, but with no exception. Potentially a stronger measure would be an 8-hour pause, but with a 1 bottle of wine exception. So if Joe and Josephine blogs want to order a bottle of wine with their pizza for rapid delivery in 40 minutes, they can. But if they want to order more than a bottle of wine, they have to wait 8 hours. If you're having a big party, you're planning it for Friday and you want the alcohol delivered, you can, because it's beyond the 8-hour pause. So I think all of this is, I think there are proportionate measures here, proportionate solutions that won't disadvantage people who are drinking, let's say, lower risk ways, but offer these protections. And we're hearing horrendous stories, deliveries to liver wards, deliveries to people in hospitals for other reasons. We've currently got a ban that these companies will not deliver junk food to schools. They currently have that within their systems. Why can't they implement the same for this? Why can't it be linked to the home address? Deliveries will only be made to the home address. So there's a range of things we need to happen. And our view is that these are quite urgent. We're hearing horror stories at scale And our polling has shown that this is not a niche issue. And again, going back to that point about wider harms as well as deaths, what we're seeing is lighter drinkers, people who are drinking at low risk, are suddenly becoming heavier drinkers. But within months, the things that I think I've been used to seeing take a decade sometimes is happening within months, and heavier drinkers are becoming dependent drinkers within months. So it's this speed of deterioration due to this rapidity, due to this frictionless situation that's causing, I would say, a quantum change in alcohol harm. We know that where people have slower deterioration, they have opportunities for intervention. Their own decision. Oh God, I'm feeling sober today. What have I been doing? Well, I'm going to go and reach out to my local treatment service. I'm going to go and see my GP. Their friend or family member manages to persuade them to explore a rehab option, etc. And we know, obviously, that many people do recover. Decline isn't inevitable. But if there's no moments of lucidity, if people are drinking 8, 9, 10, 12 bottles of wine a day, which is what's happening at scale, and it's accelerating quickly, they're not having lucidity, they're not having those moments of potential intervention. So we're not seeing recovery. So I wouldn't be surprised if, when we get to see rolling forward a few years' time to when we see the alcohol ONS alcohol specific death stats, I wouldn't be surprised if we see an increase for the last 2 years, for 25 and 26, because of this frictionless problem.
It's very interesting. You talk about these possible sort of rules that might be put in place. Are you talking about mandatory rules imposed by government, or a kind of code of practice that app providers would sign up to voluntarily?
Our preference would always be for mandatory rules. We think companies respond much better to those. And actually, companies sometimes appreciate that clarity, even though they don't all want the rules. Once they've got them, they appreciate that clarity, because it means that you haven't got anti-competitive pressure. All companies are working to the same rules, as opposed to some, potentially better run companies or more ethical companies might be sticking with a self-imposed code, but they may be undercut by those who aren't signed up to that code, or dark operators. So our strong preference would be for mandatory approach. I think also there is a risk at the moment around timing. So I think everyone should be aware of this. There's not much we can do about this, but ideally this would involve some legislative change. I've mentioned 3 measures there, but a positive 4th measure would also be a limit on hours. So let's say 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. Pretty wide window there, but at the moment it is 24/7. It's 6 in the morning. It's 2 in the morning. Nobody needs alcohol delivered rapidly. It's not a human right in those hours, and that potential introduction of that would require changes, require legislative changes, is our understanding, to the Licensing Act, which is great, but brings potential delay. We're not about to see a rewrite of the King's Speech in the next 4 days to see the Licensing Act inserted into there. So we're going to need some measures that can be introduced that have robustness and teeth to them, but that don't rely on legislation. So that's what we're talking to. We're talking to the Home Office and DHSC at the moment about precisely these questions. What can be done quickly to save lives, but that doesn't require legislative change, but is also meaningful. That's the trick here.
You mentioned there an interesting loophole, which I have to say I hadn't considered, but the one about people ordering alcohol through a cab company, where I suppose it's kind of a favour done by a driver to in inverted commas, friend. And so how does would that fit into any kind of legislative or indeed voluntary code?
Yeah, so that isn't just friends or stuff. That is absolutely a means of delivery, and it's happening at scale again. So it's not an occasional thing. So
they are licensed in some way. So cab companies are licensed in some way to provide this as a sort of add-on service to their.
No, so they're doing this unlicensed, but you're right that is where the solution lies for this, in our view, would be local licensing. We've got taxi licensing. We've also got alcohol sales licensing, but there is no such thing as alcohol delivery licensing. But using the taxi licensing rules, because it's the same local authority, using that taxi licensing system to essentially say that the delivery of alcohol is outside taxi licensing activity and cannot happen, would resolve that particular problem. So that's something that on paper seems to us eminently sensible and quite quickly deliverable. We know that local authorities have told us that they want to act on rapid deliveries, but they can't do so because of there's something called dark kitchens, which Uber Eats, Deliveroo, and not Tesco Rouge, but Just Eat is the third one, technically count as, which means that they are out with existing licensing legislation in terms of alcohol. So they're delivery, they're not retail. So our licensing system basically isn't keeping up, and local authorities can't manage that. But local authorities could, we believe, manage the taxis issue. So that would be one thing that could be done there. But we need a range of partners to step up. We need local government, we need central government, and we need these delivery companies. At the moment, they are gaslighting us. They're telling everybody there's no problem, it's nothing to do with us, or well, it's a few tiny bad apples. The classic arguments, the classic, unsupported, inaccurate arguments. We want them to just go, come on, fair enough. There's a bit of an issue here. We do want to make profit, but not at any expense. And if they can't bring themselves to do that, then they need to be made to do that.
And I guess this is the dreaded question. How do we quantify this? If we know, there are deaths, but how do we know what the cause or the proximate cause might be, and whether it is an app or it's home drinking more broadly? Is there a way that we can start to get a sort of clearer picture of what's happening?
Yeah. So I think that I would say, look, the best we're going to get here is contribution, not attribution. And I think if we wring our hands too much waiting for perfect evidence before acting, was it that the child saw the balloon on the other side of the road, or was it that the child just was kind of, we don't know, but the point is they're about to step out. Let's stop them stepping out. So let's not worry too much precisely about causality, but we do want to look at contribution. So this is where we've had hundreds and hundreds of people in touch with us, telling us that the start of using rapid delivery apps, rapid delivery for their loved one was the start of the rapid deterioration. So there's enough testimony there for us to feel, for people who know, people who are on the ground, and people who've been seeing this, to say that this is a significant trigger of worsening alcohol harm, from lighter to heavier drinking to dependency, and in some cases dependency to death. So I think first, let's trust those testimonies. They're not people with an agenda. They're people who just care. Secondly, we have undertaken polling that has looked at scale. And I think the third missing piece of that jigsaw is what I alluded to earlier, which is what are the ONS stats? Well, the time lag on those means we're not going to know. So, well, let's wait 2 years. No, let's not wait 2 years. Let's crack on with this. We've got enough evidence and common sense, actually, sometimes common sense, to say that this is likely to be leading to significant harm. And there's some measures we can put in place here that will almost certainly reduce that harm. Let's crack on with it.
One last question on this one before moving on to the next topic. But would it also respond to some extent to the usual measures that we often talk about in this field about advertising, cost and availability, as you alluded to? Well, availability obviously is part of this. Is it a different category of problem, or is it also?
No, it's an availability problem. So I think it's a subheading within availability, and it's an extreme example of where availability has, as I said, taken a quantum change from where it's been before. But there's clear intersection with price and marketing. So I see those three not as separate buckets or silos, but as things that work effectively together. So, for example, introducing a minimum unit price would have an effect on the amount of alcohol being sold for sale at home. Acting on rapid deliveries would have an effect, but thirdly, so would marketing. So what we know is, if you are like, one of our families who got in touch said she doesn't use these apps. She was upset about her sister. Her sister died as a direct result, she said, of using these apps. But she does use them. She uses them for food delivery, but she cannot turn off the alcohol marketing advertising on top of these apps. She doesn't want the alcohol. It's a tragic reminder for her of what her sister was going through. All she wants to be able to do is opt out, but she cannot do that. So marketing is also part of the picture here, alongside price and availability. And I think, this is where smart government involves not just pockets of measures to deal with specific issues. I think we've got an urgent issue right now with rapid deliveries, and we want to create some energy around that. And we do want to end this delivery trap. It makes the clear point that the context we're in affects our behaviours, which also is powerful for reframing public understandings of the whole issue of alcohol harm. So there's quite a lot of potential positivity, I suppose, in some ways, of talking about this issue in relation to shifting public understanding, but also political action. Public understanding, but also political action, because we want to see action on pricing too, and we want to see action on marketing.
Well, thank you very much for that. I'll move on to the next topic, which is a recent study you published on alcohol-free drinks and the way young people consume them, and which showed relatively little effect one way or the other on their consumption of alcohol. I just wonder what sort of practical conclusions flow from this in terms of policy making for young people and more broadly.
So great question, and let me start maybe with the context of that piece of work. We're well aware that alcohol-free drinks can play an effective role for heavy drinkers and helping them cut back, but we're also well aware and have our own model for potential risks or potential downsides. So, in our view, there has never been a smart conversation about alcohol-free drinks that's, are they good or bad? The only smart conversation is, where are they good? Where are they bad? Where do they cause problems? For whom are they a risk? And how do we maximize the benefits and mitigate the negatives? That's the question. And in order to be able to deliver policy that does that, we have to understand the benefits. We also have to understand the nature of the negatives. And in particular, the nature of the negatives at the moment is mainly theoretical, or hypothetical is probably a better word for it. So there's the concern of, for example, about the trigger effect. Then is a negative effect for people who are in recovery and may be triggered by the taste of a non-alcoholic beer to have an alcoholic beer. Now, that's potentially a hypothetical risk. There are some people who report that they worry about that, but there's very few people who've reported it actually happening. Ditto the gateway risk, which is that it helps people develop the taste or the brand awareness of an alcohol-free brand, which helps them graduate onto the alcohol version earlier or sooner or at larger scale. So a gateway effect there. And there's a number of negative effects. I think we've got a list of a total of 7. So there's 5 other negative potential effects. And what we're trying to do with our research program in this area is understand the reality. So to move away from hypothetical moral panics or hand-wringing to go, okay, what's actually happening on the ground? And therefore, what policy measures might we need to protect people from the negative effects of these drinks while promoting the positive effects of these drinks? So that was the context for this piece of work. I think what we found was that actually alcohol-free drinks was broadly irrelevant to the young people. We were looking at people as young as 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, that kind of age range. So we're not just looking at 17 and 18-year-olds in this piece of work. And it was a really strong piece of work in which we involved in-home interviews, group interviews between parents and young people, and then separate interviews with the young people and the parents separately, allowing both to speak openly. And honestly, kind of like they just didn't see the topic as that relevant to them, because then young people are not drinking alcohol-free drinks at scale. They are drinking alcohol. So we found no evidence of that gateway effect. That's not to say there is no gateway effect, but we didn't find evidence in this study of a gateway effect. So I think it's important that we, I suppose, in our field, have clear-eyed, evidence-based approaches to these kinds of things, as opposed to too much opinionitis or too much worry about hypothetical risks. Now, that doesn't make alcohol-free drinks a solution to the problem of alcohol harm in society. Indeed, that is one of our negative risks, is policy distraction. Alcohol-free drinks becomes a policy space for the government and an area where it creates opportunity cost, which you could be using to deal with rapid deliveries or MUP or alcohol marketing or placement within stores, or the range of bigger issues, stronger issues, more almost certain to be more effective issues. So there is an issue of policy distraction. Nonetheless, yeah, that's important. We did find that young people who were drinking these drinks were less likely to drink alcoholic drinks at a younger age. So if your first drink is non-alcoholic, you're more likely to continue with a non-alcoholic drink and have an alcoholic drink later in your experience. But yeah, they're not seen as relevant to young people. I suppose your question, what's the policy implication? I think there's this interesting policy option on the table at the moment, which is banning alcohol-free alternative drinks. So not banning all alcohol-free drinks. That would involve banning water and orange juice and milk, right? We're talking about alcohol-free alternative drinks to under 18. So there's an there's a voluntary kind of retailer moratorium on sales. Yeah, as we know, these drinks get coded as alcohol for the purposes of approval at checkout, and that means that they are currently not banned legally, but are difficult to purchase if you're underage. But there remains, I think, a really interesting question, both about policy distraction. What's the benefit of that policy, given that these really are not this does not seem to be a problem. But also, secondly, what message does that send? You know, what we had people within the research saying, you know, that what they're really worried about are monster drinks or very high sugar drinks, or the young person's consumption of Coke and Pepsi. You know, and there is arguably more harm in those drinks than there is in alcohol-free beers. There's certainly more sugar, but there's no talk about banning that. So I just think that whole policy space feels really confused, and we hope that this research has helped shine a little bit of a light on that, and maybe a bit more clear-eyed. Possibly sales of alcohol-free drinks to underage kids, it is probably the last thing we should all be worrying about right now. Maybe let's leave that and move on to the things that matter more.
I think it may be one of those situations where if you're not confused, you don't know what's going on. So yeah, it's definitely not a simple one. It's not a straightforward one. One point I picked out from the report was that that it showed high awareness of alcohol-free of the brands of alcohol-free versions of existing alcohol-branded drinks among this young person's group, which, while not necessarily meaning they were actually drinking these things, they are aware. You know, so it's a branding exercise. It means that maybe when they do begin drinking, assuming they do, that they may choose the brand that they have seen via alcohol-free marketing. So maybe not a gateway drug in terms of you know, being the thing that weans them onto the physical product, but maybe weans them onto the idea of that brand.
So yeah, that's number 4 on our list of potential negatives. We call that brand slippage, but there's other words for it. But and I think that is definitely a concern if you're in a society that has good controls on alcohol marketing, but people are using alcohol-free marketing as a loophole. However, in the UK, we don't have control on alcohol marketing. So our first priority should be to do that. And secondly, there are absolutely a range of effective measures that could be introduced. So for example, if an alcohol-free brand has an alcoholic parent brand, Guinness Zero, Heineken Zero, for example, you can introduce a rule that either the marketing has to strongly encourage substitution of that specific product, or that any alcohol marketing ban also applies to those alcohol versions, while allowing brands that sell only alcohol-free beverages, Lucky Saint, for example, Big Drop, etc., they wouldn't have such controls on them because there's no brand slippage. So I think that's where we need to work out what we feel as a society we want to see. But if the objective is substitution, if we know, which we do know, that big brands like Heineken and Guinness are positively driving change in the alcohol-free market because people recognise the brand. And people go, what's Lucky Saint? Never heard of that. I've heard of Guinness. Oh, Guinness Zero, brilliant. I'll try. We have to remember there is a positive to those brands if we're trying to drive substitution. So making substitution a core part of that marketing could be a public health win, as opposed to just banning that marketing. But as I say, in the UK, it's a completely moot point. This is relevant in Ireland, it's relevant in France, it's relevant in Norway. But what we don't have at the moment in the UK are any actual marketing controls in relation to alcohol, or sufficient marketing controls in relation to alcohol. So let's not get distracted about whether we're worrying about these brands, zero versions of these brands, bringing attention to young people. Currently, it's the alcoholic version of these brands that are drawing attention to anybody who's at risk of alcohol harm. So that's where our focus should be in this country right now.
And I'm just talking anecdotally. I have no survey to back me up. But if I chat to somebody about what I do and what I cover, people will often say to me, "Well, alcohol." Essentially, argue that alcohol-free drinks are the solution, or at least a large part of the solution. And almost nobody talks to me about tax availability and marketing. And I mean, you talk about distraction. I mean, it does suggest that at least on a sort of day-to-day level amongst reasonably sort of well-newsed people, that it's kind of winning that the battle for hearts and minds.
To a degree, and I think that plays into many of the basic framings that society has about alcohol harm, right? So alcohol harm is still inaccurately portrayed as solely an issue of individual choice, and in particular individual consumer choice. So therefore, it's not surprising that people will alight on a different consumer choice as being the solution. But actually, that's where our work on the reframing of alcohol harm is so important, which is to help people see that context counts, and to explain that in a way that feels non-threatening to people and actually relatable to people, hence my chocolate box example right at the top. We have to find ways to cut through with people that go, actually, of course price makes a difference. Does it not make a difference? Are we suddenly reinventing economics, that the price is not relevant to consumption? And of course marketing makes a difference, and of course availability makes a difference. And I think one of the challenges that we all face is holding true to that both and argument. I see sometimes too many people in our field do a pendulum swing away from individual responsibility to only price availability marketing, only contextual changes. The only solutions to alcohol harm lie in population level solutions, which is equally nonsense. They're both nonsense. The idea that either one or the other is the only solution are nonsense. And we have to hold firm, which the Alcohol Change UK stands very strongly on, that the solution is both and. Yes, we need more individual empowerment, behaviour change, which is where our behaviour change work comes in, and we need contextual change. And I think that's the only way we take the public with us.
And just getting into the weeds a little bit on this report you did on this, you suggest updating the CMO, the Chief Medical Officer guidelines for young people. Could you sort of go into what those changes might be?
I'm not close enough to that detail to be totally honest with you. So that recommendation came from the report authors, and that might be a better question for them. But we would, I would say that we know that alcohol, we know that the Chief Medical Officer's guidance does have a section on young people currently. And it does essentially recommend an alcohol-free childhood. I think one of the issues that we currently face is that the CMO guidance contains stuff on heavy drinkers. It contains stuff on women who are pregnant. Contains stuff on young people, and the regular drinkers. It contains the 14 units piece and the few days off piece. When we talk about the CMO guidance as a field, we so frequently talk only about the 14 unit bit, not the wider bit. So, for example, if we're talking about alcohol labeling as a solution, why wouldn't we have, for example, a rotating message about aspects of that CMO guidance, so that the full guidance, because there's a lot of great stuff in that guidance, that full guidance is given the airtime it requires, rather than just focusing on the 40 units for regular drinkers. And I'm not saying we shouldn't focus on the 40 units. It's a really important message. For all its strengths and weaknesses as a message, it's nonetheless the message we currently have. But the days off piece is important. The young people alcohol-free childhood is important, and the wording around drinking during pregnancy is valuable, as opposed to awful icons that have a picture of a pregnant woman crossed out, whatever that's meant to mean, and expecting an icon like that to do all the work that actually we've got great wording already in that CMO guidance. We should be promoting that wording. So I would like to see us taking a broader view of the full guidance and potentially seeing that, but on labels, but also on our websites, etc.
Well, thank you very much for coming online, Richard, and making yourself available for not one, not two, but three different topics all in one go. So that's very much appreciated. I hope to speak to you again at some point.
No worries. Thanks very much.